all complete one of the exercises together, but a very, very small version of it, just to give you a taste. It's important to note, and I'm sure the extension team will verify this, but this type of training works best in person and with groups with a community goal, project, or outcome. We're virtual, all coming from different contexts and only here for a short time together. So this, again, is just a brief introduction, and you'll be able to request more information in a follow-up email about learning more, to learn more about the full training. All right, just to see if Ellen has joined us. Okay. All right, well, let's go ahead and we'll start introducing our speakers. First, we have Becky Bowen, Susan Jakes, and Kenny Sharon. Since we're short on time today, we can encourage you to click on their names at the bottom of our summer camp page for their impressive bios. But Becky is Senior Program Manager of Cultivate NC at NC State. Susan is the Associate State Program Leader for Community and Rural Development for Extension and Extension Assistant Professor at NC State. And near to our hearts on the Band NC team is Kenny Sharon, who is the new Broadband Access and Education Coordinator, as well as County Extension Director of Randolph County. Thank you for joining us today and teaching us into the ripple effects mapping.
So good morning. It's so good to be with you. I see lots of old extension friends. I'm going to do a special shout out to Musu from Durham. I met her this weekend at the Duke Durham Neighborhood Partnership meeting. It's just fun to see so many community activists and people doing great things in their communities here. So I think ripple effects mapping is a really way to capture the impact of these kind of diverse, complex things that we're doing in a community. And I think the inspiration of this list, I think this Robert Kennedy quote from 1966 captures that really well. So each time a man stands up for an ideal, or acts to improve the lot of others, or strikes out against injustice, he sends a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep down the mightiest walls of oppression and resistance. And I think this really speaks to a lot of the work that you're doing in your communities. These ripples, a lot of times they're generated from people's energy. And as we garner communities' kind of energy, and as they begin to really own the issues and share in the work, I think they begin to send these energy ripples out that have a tremendous impact on our communities. So ripple effects mapping is an evaluation methodology. It was developed by some specialists at Minnesota and done particularly all over the Northwest US. And this is kind of rippling down to this part of the US in the last, 15 years. But it's an evaluation methodology that maps impacts of programming, and it's really focused on addressing complex issues. It's easy. It's reflective. We had a new staff person the last 2 days that was doing ripple effects mapping with Becky and I and Kenny. All three of us were there. But it was fascinating because she's like, I work and I work and I work. And it's so good to come and reflect on what I did. And I was like, exactly. It was so interesting to hear her express this. Able to assess systems level changes. So it's not just interested in how many people showed up and what did they learn, but it's really looking at how we're able to impact systems that are complex and maybe changing and evolving. So this is something that could be done repeatedly to get at those kind of more evolving or dynamic issues. It's able to demonstrate both intended and unintended consequences. A lot of what we do is kind of, we didn't really intend for that to happen, but things happen. Again, my colleague, she was talking about, she's a professional table tennis player, but she's talking about setting up table tennises in her office in Wilson County and the unintended consequences. Like people from all over the office in different organizations are coming to play and having interactions they wouldn't have otherwise. And it's just fascinating to kind of see what would be the ripples of the energy she brought to this workplace. It's able to identify areas of unmet need, and it's really fostering greater connectivity between stakeholders. Something just happened to my slides. I don't know if it, okay. And it's really important because it allows people to speak to and see the impact of their programs. You know, I think we have this process of learning, but sometimes, particularly me, I'm very visual, but people are able to see their impacts up on the board, and it's really a powerful for kind of group learning and validation of what's happened as a result of an intervention. Okay, next slide. So a lot of time impacts are direct. They might be indirect, so there might be a ripple that leads to a ripple that leads to a ripple. So an impact that's out here, but it's just as caused by the original action as much as anything, or it could be as delayed or later in time, as we talked about a minute ago. So community development is a really important foundation to making change in communities, but it's hard to count. My whole career has been thinking about how do we count and understand community development work. A lot of times we have to do this community level work to see these broader impacts. So it's kind of a precondition to help these other things to happen. And sometimes we don't see these impacts for a long time. So it could be months or even years later. But having the relationships, ripple effects mapping develops relationships in an interesting way. And you'll see that if you ever get to watch it happen. But those ripples can be captured later on because those relationships are established through the process. So what are the ripples? So this is a really linear way to think about this for those who need to kind of put a scaffolding in their brain. But sometimes we think about the ripples, the short-term ripples or the short-term impacts of the program are the first level of ripples. So it might be something learned, a connection made, a new partnership, a grant that was put forth, that sort of thing. The midterm ripple is what happened next. So these are kind of as we send our ripples of energy out into the world. What have been actions taken because of the direct result of the program? And then later we get to the longer term ripples. What are the bigger changes, the new ways of doing things, new connections, new events, new resources that have developed because of the work? So now we're going to get a little bit into the nitty gritty of what is ripple effects mapping. So there are kind of two models for how we do this work. So it's really centered in appreciative inquiry, which is really understanding the best of what is and using it as a way to build a foundation for future work, and participatory evaluation. So this way of evaluating that the participants they're an essential part of the evaluation. The evaluation is not done to a community, but it's done with a community, and they may develop their own questions. And we do want to have, in ripple effects mapping, you want the program leadership to develop the questions. They're going to think about how the information garner can be used, and they're going to create the data gathering will all be done at the community level. So this is not a person coming out and doing ripple effects mapping to a community. It's a community doing this with kind of a support group or kind of facilitators. So the process is different than the model. Slide back, please. Okay. We're going to do interactive group interviews, and then Becky is going to go through in more details the process. There's a process of radiant thinking, so understanding the ripples. We use kind of a mind mapping methodology to do this. And then really important in ripple effects mapping is the follow-up data gathering. So the thing that happens after we all get together, the cleaning, coding, and analysis of the data, like making it digestible and understandable for others, and reporting back to stakeholders so they can begin to own the information, build on the information, and take the information to do further work. So the appreciative inquiry interview will really be a foundation for how we understand what happened. So it will say things in its narrative. It's not like, how many trainings did you do and how many people showed up and what were those people from? But it's like, tell me a story about how you have used the information from the program. So it's a narrative approach. So it's trying to get at different parts of people's brains and thinking and experience than a more quantitative approach might be. Is there anything resulting from the program that you're proud to share? So people can begin to think not only what happened because of the program, but how did I participate in that? And how did I make things happen because of this program? List an achievement or success you had based on what you learned. So again, what did you do? And what kind of change have you created? So it's an empowering approach. Have you created in the community based on what you learned? So you took what the program had to offer, and what did you make happen because of that? So it's really interested in your power. And what are 3 wishes you have for the future? So again, trying to understand what a person hopes and dreams for the community, and this is appreciative inquiry at its best. What kind of hopes and dreams they have for a community based on what they've seen was able to happen through the program, and what kind of energy and ripples came off the program from there. Okay, next slide. So again, I explained participatory evaluation pretty well, but it comes from this larger framework of participatory research. So again, instead of an evaluator coming from the outside and neutrally assessing program outcomes, I don't really believe anybody's neutral. The program participants or stakeholders do everything from asking the questions, framing the questions, collecting the data, analyzing the data. And main goal participatory evaluation is not to say whether you did good or you did bad, but it's to do better work. Okay, next slide. And this is the last slide that I'm going to share, but again, we want to think of ripples, or we can think of a tree with many branches. And this is kind of radiant thinking. This is meant, I'm really interested in my work in community development of how can we kind of expand thought? How can we get people to think more broadly? How can we get them to dream, to have imagination in the way that they do? And ripple effects mapping really fits well into that. Radiant thinking happens when thoughts radiate out like the branches of a tree, the veins of a leaf, or the blood vessels of the body that emanate from the heart. And I think that emanating from the heart really captures ripple effects mapping, because it's not a neutral diagnostic tool. It's something where people bring their energy to it, their passions, and so they can better understand their work in the communities. So now I'm going to turn over to Becky, and she's going to take it from here and give us more than nitty gritty.
Great. Thank you, Susan. Hello, everyone. It's so good to see all of you, and especially all of our extension colleagues. And I even see some colleagues from the University of Kentucky. So, hey, y'all, really good to see you. Before I get into this slide, I do want to just give a description of some ripple effects mapping that I'm doing currently. I have been doing some strategic planning and implementation in the western part of the state. So recently we went back there to talk to several people that we've worked with as a result of 2.5 years of work. And the ripple effect mapping involves an interview process. So we've held some focus groups, and we're going to follow those up with some more interviews. But basically, just to give you an example of what has happened as a result, we had a strategy where we're trying to support the retail and hospitality sector in the region. And we've had several strategies with respect to that. And one of the strategies was where students at the local university went out and interviewed 120 businesses to just see, where they were in terms of getting their business on the web, for example, but also, how well informed their employees were with respect to what there was to do in the region. Well, from that, we had the students report out to all of the economic developers in the region, and then they reported again at this big conference that we held that was attended by over 300 people. And then from that, we had one of those students get a job with a county economic developer. And I was interviewing him just to ask him, well, how were you impacted by working on this project? And his story, and again, ripple effects mapping is all about stories. His story was that this project gave him direction in his life. Now he knows where he wants to go. He really wants to get into economic development. It's given him a path. And so those are the types of stories that we really want to capture. It's not how many people attended trainings. It's not how many new jobs were created. It's how people in the community itself were impacted by the region. So on the slide here is your a typical mapping session agenda. And we're going to get into this. We're just going to try it out. It may be, it's not going to be provide as rich feedback as we typically would have, because not all of you know one another. But we'll conduct at this appreciative inquiry exercise. There'll be pairs of you, and you're going to reflect on how your relationship with IEI has affected you personally. So from that, we'll share some stories. I will facilitate your responses, and we'll try to collect those on the map, and Kenny's going to help us with that. Then we will theme your responses, and then we'll ask from that, okay, these first themes are kind of the primary ripples. What happened as a result of these primary ripples? Give me a little bit more detail. And that's where those secondary and tertiary ripples will be reflected. After we go through a mapping session, we'll also gather negative feedback about any program work. And then we also reach back into the community and talk to other stakeholders, do additional interviews to get more information about the ripples that have been collected. And then from there, we clean, code, and analyze the ripples, then go back to a community and present the findings. So that's the typical process. It takes a while. As Susan said, we do work with sort of the leadership team who wants to bring ripple mapping into their community. We work with them to develop the questions that are asked in this appreciative inquiry exercise. Next slide, please. Okay, so this here is an example of what the first stage of a ripple map looks like. It's kind of a spider webby thing. So this example that I have here is a program that I helped develop called Vacationer Supported Agriculture. You can see that the primary ripples were working with another department within Extension, the community partnerships that we developed, the funder development, awards that came as a result of the program. But let's take a deeper dive with the community partnerships. Here we list the different communities that we worked with. And then if you look at the top ripple, the one that says Columbus, Brunswick counties, you can see that they developed a new food hub. They developed a new CSA. There were several youth development opportunities that came as a result of it. And they also developed new funding sources. So all of this is as a result, goes all the way back to the relationship that was built between NC State Extension through the Vacationer Supported Agriculture with that particular community partner. That's not always captured when you're reporting back to a funder. These indirect ripples of that relationship. The direct results of the Vacation Supported Agriculture all related to, what was the value of the sales of produce that were made. But then look at all the other things that actually happened as a result of the program. Next slide. So what we do with that sort of spider diagram is we can create a more finished product, which then can be shared with possible funders, with county government and elected officials. This is an example of a ripple map that we made with a group in Eastern Carteret County that they really wanted to build communication within their county and across different neighborhoods. And you can see the primary ripples here are listed as broadening connections, crossing cultural boundaries, accessing and sharing resources, gaining technical knowledge, and impacting individuals and communities. Next slide, please. So what we did then is we took one of those primary ripples, in this case, broadening connections, and then we start showing some of the secondary and tertiary ripples that resulted as a result of that primary theme of broadening connections. In their case, they created institutional partnerships where there had been none before. They initiated collaborations with different agencies. They built professional opportunities among the members of this community group, and they found safe spaces for sensitive conversations. So this is how you can take that spidery representation of a mind map and then create it into a much more easily digestible product. Next slide. Now, there are limitations with ripple effects mapping. There is the possibility of risk of bias. And you want to make sure that you interview people, you have them as part of a focus group or individual interviews. Who's participating? Make sure that you have a diverse group of people who have participated in the project. And not all participants have complete information about all of the program outcomes. That's why you have to make sure to fan it out so that you're not just interviewing program staff. You're actually going out and looking at other people who may have been not just participate in a planning process, for example, but who have actually benefited from the process. There's also potential for inconsistency with respect to implementation of the mapping process, follow-up analysis, those types of things. Next slide. Okay, so some tips when you do ripple effect mapping. You want to use the same facilitator. You'll have a separate recorder and a mapper. You need to have a facilitator guide that has prompts and probes that helps the facilitator get the most information from the people who are participating. You want to make sure that not one organization gets all of the credit because it does take a village. If not everyone is there, you want to make sure that you follow up with different people who are not able to attend the focus group so that you can get a full picture. You need to put some effort into recruiting and explaining the process. Obviously, we're explaining the process today, but anyone who is involved in putting ripple effects mapping needs to understand what it's all about. You want to make sure that people are comfortable in the setting. You don't want it to be too informal, but you also don't want it to be too formal. It's important that you use external facilitators, not program staff. Program staff will tend to be biased and only reflect the good things about a program. You want to make sure that you get some negative feedback. Things maybe didn't go quite as well as you wanted it to go. And understand that this is an emergent narrative method. So don't try to use this to reflect your quantitative results. Don't try to use this to reflect how many jobs were created, how many new businesses were created. You want this to be stories that are told, relationships that are built. Next slide, please. Okay, Kenny, you're up.
Okay, we're gonna give it a try, right? So we'll set us up with the breakout rooms for you to be able to have these participatory interviews, appreciative inquiry interviews. You'll have an opportunity to talk for just a few minutes we realize doing this through Zoom is not the best format to do this. When this is done in an organization for organization, we're in the room together. You have your people gathered, your stakeholders, the people that have know about the project in a room together. We have big sheets of paper on the wall, and it's a lot more interactive, and we don't have this barrier of technology between us. But we just want to demonstrate what we are doing here, and give you an example of how this might work. So we'll do breakout rooms for interviews. We'll get instructions from that in just a minute. Then once we come back from those breakout rooms, we'll build the map. And I have a software called Miro that I'll share my screen, and we'll build the map and start exploring these themes of how your interactions with IEI have changed you personally. And then we'll access the ripples and ask the questions, and we'll follow up and in the mapping session with prompting questions that will get you to talk about the what the program has meant to you. So next slide, please. So this is going to be the questions that we'll ask you. Again, if you've not had experience with IEI, because I saw on the chat where some of you are brand new to IEI, take the opportunity to meet whom you're paired up with, and then just brainstorm about how you might partner with IEI in the future. So in your community. So like I said, we understand this is not the best format with a wide variety of people together in a room, but we want to be able to demonstrate, and we have to have a starting point somewhere. We have to have a stone to throw into the pond to make this ripple start happening. So your connection to IEI is that stone in this case, in this example case. So these questions will appear in the chat in your breakout rooms. So I'll leave it up to Ellen to discuss the breakout rooms and how we'll do that.
Yes, hello again. Sorry about those tech issues today, y'all. But like mentioned, it is breakout time. And listen, we know that breakouts are not everybody's favorite. We acknowledge that. We really hope you would like to stay, but if for some reason your partner leaves, make sure you exit your room and come back, and we'll pair you up with somebody else or add you to a pair already. Remember, we're doing a pair exercise on Zoom with so many different rooms. So if it doesn't automatically work, just ask us questions, and we're adapting an in-person training to virtual. So we're all figuring it out as we go. You'll have 10 minutes in your breakout rooms to ask these appreciative inquiry questions, and have someone in your pair take brief bullet points just to answer, so we can build up our map from your reflections. It's by no means perfect, but since you are all at an IEI training, we're going to use us as an example today, since it's the thing that we all have in common. We realize that this won't be the most helpful example to those new to IEI or have only briefly worked with us, but ask you in that case to think about IEI broadly. Maybe you're working with one of our partners, attending an event, or even NC State in general. The goal is for you to see how the process works, and so feel free to adapt to these questions. And your pairs, just make sure you introduce yourself first with your role, your name, your organization, and we'll broadcast these questions, and you can check out the chat as well. Again, take loose notes for when we get back together. And a reminder that after our session today, you'll get an interest form if you're interested in opportunities to bring this training to in person to your organization. And I'll just go ahead and say thank you so much to Jen, our amazing comms team member with us today, for breaking us out into breakout rooms. You'll have 10 minutes in there, and we'll give you a reminder when time is almost up. And if you get done early, feel free to come back to the main room.
All right. Well, hey, everyone. So welcome back. I hope that you enjoyed your time together, getting to know one another, and hopefully learn a little bit more about that person's experience with IEI. So at this point, we're going to act like this were an in-person session. I am acting as the facilitator, so I will be asking the questions. Penny is going to be our mapper using the Miro software, but if you're doing it in person, you'll have sheets of butcher block paper taped to the walls and, and a marker, and doing this very same thing that he's doing online now. And then Ellen volunteered to be our note taker. And it's really important that you have a note taker who's recording, because it's difficult for the mapper to actually get all of the information, whereas the note taker really can supplement the mapping process. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to ask the first question, and we're just going to ask for a response from anyone who would like to respond. It's difficult for me to see you, so just shout on out there. First question. Can you share how your experience with IEI, including IEI programs or partners you connected with through IEI, might have changed you personally or shifted the way you view things? And do you have a story to share? Anyone? How has IEI affected you personally?
Somebody be brave and be the first one.
I can go. This is Kelly from Central Carolina Community College. In our group, we talked about just that that the different IEI events really helped us. They were intellectually stimulating and enriched us in ways that made us think outside the box, and helping other leaders understand the whys behind projects, or why projects or initiatives go the way they do. There's a lot of the different programs talk about systems and things like that. And also learning that personal stories matter. I mean, I'm not going to share my personal story, but that idea that personal stories matter becomes critical in a lot of different initiatives. And in my situation, it's in grant writing, that it's not just about talking about the data, but talking about, the personal and community stories behind particular initiatives.
Right. Excellent. Thank you, Kelly. Anybody else? How
This
has
is-
IEI? Go ahead.
Yeah, this is Jane. I need to do a fact check first to make sure it was an IEI sponsored event. Around 210 to 211, perhaps there was a forum about water that was held at the McKimmon Center. I see Susan shaking her head. Yes. Yes. Okay. So I helped at that conference to be a facilitator. And for me, very similar to what Kelly was saying about, opening your eyes to things. But as a facilitator, people were like, now, what is it you do? Because in my group, I had a bunch of scientists and biotech people, and they were interested that as I was part of cooperative extension at the time, that we had the social connection with the people in the counties to actually help implement change. They could develop all the change, but I really see, IEI as a huge connector for me. And that's that has been my experience, is that anytime I see what's going on with IEI, I can think, oh, what is our connection as, my careers move forward, is how can I continue to connect, to help connect then in other bigger ways.
Great. Wonderful. Thank you. Did anyone else have a similar experience to Jane or Kelly?
I want to add just quickly on what Jane said. So can he maybe capture, there was a better understanding of Extension's role in the community. I think, so only was the creation, but people had a better understanding of kind of what we do as an arm of NC State. I don't know if Jane, if that captures what you were saying.
Very well, thank you.
Great. Anyone else?
I can just add for our group, we had a similar outcome because Amanda and I are both newer to IEI, and just in this event alone, we were able to make some connections. And so we saw IEI as a connector among multiple disciplines who would not normally come together. And then we see or we find some overlap within the work that we're doing.
Great, sort of breaking down the silos of the work that's out there. Yes, excellent. Thank you, Tammy. Anyone else?
Yes, I can. I was first introduced to IEI at one of your, I believe, January or February symposiums several years ago with Governor Hunt, who really opened my eyes to a lot of things that I was not aware of. By the way, I'm from Weaverville, and with the Economic Development Council over here in just north of Asheville.
Mhm.
But then, I've been attending a lot of the other things, particularly the broadband, and now we're in the process of installing high-speed internet to the last mile, thanks to some of the infrastructure. But then in the last presentation here on ripple effect, I was trying to see if I could capture some of the intangibles that escape recognition, if not being able to show a value to those intangibles. And then I was blindsided by the community capitals. I'm just had no I had no idea those things existed.
Mhm. Yeah. Great. Thank you, Chuck. Anyone else want to respond to this first question?
I have a great narrative from my group. This isn't mine because I have known about IEI. I've heard the term. I've seen all the emails as an NC State employee for years, but I have to admit, until I got in here today, I didn't fully really understand all the type of work that the group did. So this has been very helpful. But the story from my group's discussion is we did have a person who has been involved with IEI for years, and especially she works with faith communities and has been part of the conferences that IEI has with faith communities. And she talked about how it always brings together a diverse group of people from various denominations and even different religions. And for her personally, that has helped make her world a little bigger than it currently is, just by having those building those opportunities she wouldn't have otherwise had to meet and get to know people from these different religious communities.
Hey, thank you, Charlotte. Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah, I felt like I think that is so important, especially with people being so isolated now in their, just their little pockets of who they are. And so I think that's extremely important work to bring these diverse communities together.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. We did have a sort of an alternate question for those people who are new. Is there anything that anyone would like to share with respect to how they might partner with IEI in the future? Does any of the new people want to contribute to that? No?
I can share a little bit. So my name is
Thank you,
Amanda
Amanda.
Mueller, and I work as the director of NC State's Climate Leaders Program. And so I'm new to NC State in the last couple of years, and have thankfully got to meet Sarah and have worked with Anita Brown Graham, who's a former director of IEI. And so I know for me and working, I work with students and I work with faculty members and I work with community partners and internship hosts. And so as Charlotte was saying, the newsletters come and so I can kind of skim and read those, and then really looking to try to, I guess, in the ripple effect, analogy, help extend that ripple, right? That there's a lot of folks that don't have that connection yet. And so so I always appreciate, the breadth of the topics that IEI covers, and kind of the openness and willingness to touch on, more than just one thing. But then they offer that depth too. And so being able to take that, in our group, we were kind of setting analogies and thinking, with hurricanes being poignant right now, right, that there's the ripple of effect where the normal waves are hitting the beach and having that extension. But every now and again, it takes a big storm to reach out to that smaller, environment or community and pull them into the larger fold. So I appreciate IEI being kind of that springboard and starting point, for some of those harder conversations.
Good points, Amanda. Okay, so let's just take a few minutes more, and I'll ask the second question. How has your experience with IEI changed the way that you relate to your broader community? I know that some of you have already shared that, but are there others who can talk about how IEI has changed the way that you relate to your broader community?
I'll jump back in from our group. We did talk a lot about partnerships and a lot of the things people have already talked about, but a couple of us are from rural communities around the state, and it's really just that understanding of our role as we think about maybe Raleigh and Triangle and emanating out and where we are in that ecosystem. So really just thinking about how we as rural communities can be a part of that bigger picture, and when some of those things that are happening in the Triangle are going to reach out to us. I know I'm in Lee County, and so we're very close to Wake County. We're just down the highway, but we're still considered rural. And so understanding those relationships and how we can start partnering with other organizations and bringing ourselves closer to those projects. And also another topic that came up was just the idea of learning lessons from other places that have gone through what we're going through. So CCCC also services Chatham County, which is going through huge growth right now. And we were talking about Warren County and that being a little bit further out, and so them being able to maybe learn some of the lessons that Chatham County is learning now. And so just that idea that although we might be farther out, we might not be in the center of it, we're not that far away, and we can learn from each other as we all sort of become a part of that growth that's going on in our state.
So it's not just the connection with IEI, it's the connection with all of the other communities that they've helped to introduce you to, and then what develops from that. Yeah, and so that would be another ripple, is all of the projects that you start with other communities, other learnings from those communities would be an additional ripple. Yeah, great. Thank you, Kelly. Anyone else want to talk about how you now relate to your broader community?
I just want to point out really quick here, if you kind of look at the map that Kenny's drawing, how the ripples are getting kind of richer. And so this is the process of us learning together how to report, and Kenny's also ability to capture it as he begins to understand more of what we're talking about. But this is something that, again, you can go back and add to your ripples. And if we were doing this in person and had a lot more time, you could make these a lot broader. But as you can see, they are getting richer as we go. Sorry about that.
Yeah. Tracy, you have a question?
No, I just wanted to jump into the conversation. Hi, I'm Tracy. I'm with My Future NC. I serve in the western part of the state. And I just want to say one of the tremendous benefits for me personally working with IEI, I've worked very closely with Pat. I see Pat on the screen. Is really just being such a great thought partner in conversation, and also helping me recognize partners that maybe I hadn't considered around a certain topic. And so I don't know about anybody else, but sometimes you just need someone to talk something through with. And IEI is just a really fabulous, grounded partner that I feel is that I trust and that I know gets the priority of the work that we're doing and understands the vision. And so I'm grateful for that. And that has helped me and our other team members tremendously in the work that we're doing around educational attainment and workforce.
Great. Thank you so much, Tracy.
And I'll add some more here that what we talked about, the questions flashed up pretty quick, so we didn't actually get see the actual wording, but we had a lot of great conversation, and some of it was around the similar to this thought partner, but also thought partner in evaluation methodology and thinking about how do we capture things. I mean, all of us in our group, we do a lot of, pre-post, quantitative, there it is. But how do we capture and thinking about why we do programs? What are we doing for the community and the greater community? And then what is, really happening beyond those quantitative pieces? And how do we amplify those impacts? So that was something that came out in our group as we discussed the methodology, but also, IEI is bringing it to us.
One more. Anybody else want to contribute?
Sure, I will. I am Musu. I'm new to IEI, but my partner felt that because of her partnership with IEI as a grantee and with the Duke Endowment, her networks have been stronger and her organization has been able to access more resources. So the networking is stronger, resources are more available, and the ability to share information across the network and to learn about issues regarding the rural faith community has been very important to her.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Just sharing those resources. There's just so much out there that is so valuable and available to people, but they don't know about it. Right. And so just, again, it's about building those connections. Yes, very good. Thank you, Ms. All right. Well, I think that this is enough of an example. You see how the map is being built, in the session that you're doing. But it will get much richer as more feedback is gathered from other people who may not have been attending the focus group. And then you'll want to create something that is much more easily digestible than this as well.
So just think about, instead of this block being IEI, think of the work around faith communities, and you have people that's been involved in that group, how rich the ripples will be if you're focused in on a particular program. You start with a narrower stone or a ripple, the central part, and that's where you really do find those engaging conversations and those ripples that impact going outward.
And again, you will work with the facilitator and develop the questions that you want to inspire conversation about particular program ripples. Okay, so Kenny, I think you have the next slide. So Jen, if you could pull the PowerPoint back up. No, let's go back one. No? Okay. Sorry, I have the next slide. All right. So how do you use this ripple map? So you want to find what is practical that's coming out of the map. What has really been beneficial to the community, and that is something that they can use. And this concept, I think Chuck, you mentioned, what are the community capitals? I don't know what the community capitals are, but you want some people, when they do ripple mapping, they'll actually take each of the 7 community capitals as like, what happened in terms of politically, what happened with respect to the project in terms of social groups, how are they impacted? How has the natural environment been impacted by this work? How has the built environment been impacted by the work? So you really want to find all of the community capitals and see how the project is impacting them. You also want to look for what we call odd couple stories of people who might not have met one another, but for the project that you're working on and what developed as a result. You need to identify who's interested in the outcomes of your map. Is it with a project? Maybe it's a board, maybe it's a funder, maybe it is someone in the county that might be interested in the outcomes, or maybe it's just the stakeholders themselves, the community itself that is interested in the outcomes. And share your good news, find testimonials, take these stories and share them with other people through social media. And then also, if there are any celebrities or more important people that have been impacted by your program, people are always more interested in what they have to say than the rest of us who aren't quite as in the news as much. But yeah, feature those important people and how they might have been. Next slide, please.
There is a question in the Q&A section that one participant asked, how does the mapping include any negative feedback? Is that a separate question for a participant? So yeah, the facilitator will have to prompt that feedback. So it would be a separate question. People have the opportunity to give maybe what didn't work well, or what would you have changed? You can go about it. You don't have to say what's the negative feedback, but you can find ways to prompt to solicit things that could have worked better. So you can go about it like that. So it's not you're not feeling like you're slamming the program necessarily, but you can get to that feedback where things could have worked better. So in a very diplomatic way. So yeah, so the discussion here, what programs might use this method? I'll use an example of how I've used the method before. So before I moved back to North Carolina, I'm originally from North Carolina. I worked in South Dakota with the Cooperative Extension Service there. We had a program that we implemented in several communities across South Dakota, but also in Nebraska and North Dakota. So we developed the questions that we wanted to ask, and we ripple mapped each of those community impacts. And then we brought each of those ripple maps together and analyzed those for common themes and look for what happened across these different communities. And that helped us better refine the program in itself. So ripple effect mapping has several layers of usefulness, even several ripples of usefulness. Even you can use it for one project, or you can look at it across a whole system using several communities. So that's one. So I ask the question now, what do you see? What would be useful to you in programs that you know about? Just unmute and shout it out. Do you have concern? Yeah, go ahead.
I'll go. I mean, I mentioned in the chat when I introduced myself that I am involved with the Southwest Central Durham Quality of Life Project, which is a collaborative of 6 neighborhoods around Duke that over the last 20 years have done some amazing work addressing economic development, affordable housing, nonprofit sustainability. And I can see, as we're thinking through what is next for the organization and considering whether or not to expand and engage the other 8 neighborhoods that are around Duke, this would be a good methodology to use to see what do we have, and you know, how do we use what we have to broaden the mandate of the original 6. So I see that. This is why I even came today for the summer camp.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
I think it would be a great tool to do that. And you might have someone that lives nearby that could help you with that.
Yes.
And this is Jane again. And in my group, we actually identified 3 groups immediately that would be really good to work this with. And they're mostly working with building communities of health. So the Eat Smart Move More North Carolina movement, which is several partners coming together from across the state working on building healthy communities through physical activity, access to healthy foods. iHope, which works with supporting early childhood education across the state, a number of partners with that. And then a kind of a newer group called NC Snack, which is convened by SNAP granted agencies from the Food and Nutrition Services and adding in a lot of nonprofits. My experience in working with these has been there are a lot of entities, small, medium, and large, working on healthy food, access to healthy food, physical activity opportunities, access to physical activity opportunities. And if we can all get together and talk this through, and then we can really show impacts. And one of the participants in my group said amplifying impacts. I love that, amplifying impacts. That's what this method shows, is how we amplify impacts. And that was just a beautiful way of, I think, summing it up.
I like that, Jane. In the projects I did in South Dakota, often you get these large format papers and such, and even toyed with getting a bed sheet to put up on the wall and drawing this, and it sort of becomes the art of your work as you map the ripples and the impacts of those ripples throughout the community. It's sort of, I often thought about that. It becomes a piece of art that shows the impact of the work. So that, I like the amplifying the impact. Even the ripple map itself can be that amplifier of that impact. So there's this last question. There's another participant in the Q&A section. Can ripple mapping be used as a sampling method, or is it mostly to try to get all participants in a smaller project? I would say if you're trying to do a sampling method, that would lend more toward a survey or a questionnaire. The ripple effect mapping is a participatory process where you get people that's been impacted by a particular program, and you get them in the room, and you just start analyzing and writing out what's going on, and the feedback that you hear from that. So I think there's 2 different approaches to trying to gather that information. If you want it to be more of a sample method, I would say it lends more towards survey or questionnaire, but this is more of a interactive means of evaluation.
And I'll just add to that. Cooperrider, who developed appreciative inquiry, is really fascinated with this idea of whole systems change. And so in appreciative inquiry approaches, this is related to it, it's getting everybody in the room that an impact in the system, and really intentionally mixing the groups of the people that do this work. And one concern with sampling, you can be really intentional and really get a cross section of the people that were involved. But you never know kind of where the energy and the real ripple is going to come from. So you need to be really careful about
Right.
picking and choosing who would participate in this process.
Okay, other discussions or on any of these questions seen on the screen here?
I think as I look at it, so, kind of to tie into the being able to use it for our program. So with my Climate Leaders program, we're new, so we're just in our second year. I have 10 to 15 students and their faculty. They do an internship, right? So they have that. And then we do community connection projects as well. I think for me, the challenge would be in putting that stakeholder or conversation group together is how do you make sure you capture broad enough and in all the same directions, right? Like I think of dropping a pebble in the water and it goes in a circular motion. How do you make sure you get all the cardinal directions in that conversation, not leave a group out, and how do you reach far enough? So I don't know if there's any suggestions and feedback, on putting that conversation group together.
My experience with that has been you're not going to get everyone in your focus group to, the initial mapping session. That's all it is. It's the initial session. And it's the job of the ripple mapping team to use the participants and find out who's not been included, right? And they can actually go and have some interviews and then report back to us more findings. So it just really, it radiates out and you use the participants, the stakeholders themselves to help you gather that feedback. Susan, Kenny, do you have other experiences?
I would say just be intentional about your invitations. And let the invitation be able to snowball. If you share that invitation with someone and they know someone that they think should be involved, have it be okay for them to bring that person. So that helps cover those, I would not really fringe people, but those people you might not have thought about, but a participant that has been impacted by the program might know who else needs to be in the room. So I think just being able to be intentional about how you invite people to the session.
Yeah, Amanda, I'll just add to that. I appreciate the question because with any qualitative technique, you have to decide Kenny mentioned snowballing and sampling. Snowball sampling, you're going to ask until you stop getting new information. But in ripple effect sampling, you can't tell sometimes where that energy is. And so you have to, at the beginning with the executive team, is make a decision about what kind of resource you have to put into this and talk about how can you maximize kind of the breadth of your sample with the resources you have, because we all have limited resources of time and energy and money. So I think that's a great conversation to have at the beginning is how can you get the broadest sample with the resources you have to contribute.
Other questions or comments? We're coming up pretty close on time. Ellen, are you going to close us out or?
Yeah,
One more slide on
absolutely.
resources too.
Yes. Oh yes, there's one more.
So this last resource is what I want to point you to. It's about a 60-page guide, a field guide for ripple effects mapping. The people that wrote this are just really brilliant community development and evaluation people around the country. And it really kind of lays out some of the basic foundations and inspirations behind this work, as well as really kind of a practical how-to. So this is a great place to start. for learning more about ripple effects mapping and then partnering with somebody who has some experience. Back to you, Ellen.
All right.
If I may.
Yeah.
Earlier when we first started, you were talking about how we could reach out to our local extension office for assistance in ripple effects mapping. What is the ask that we are making to our local office? Is it for them to connect us with someone else? What is that ask? What is it that we need to be asking them for?
Where are you?
Caswell County.
Caswell County. Yeah, so you can talk to your office. So you went to this session with Becky Bowen and Kenny Sharon and Susan Jakes, and you're really interested in this. And I think for us from Extension, we want the local office to be involved in the process too. And so we don't want to just use them as a conduit to get to us, but also to develop the capacity locally all the time and to really rely on those local connections. So I think having the conversation with the director and is a great place to start. And I think Ellen's going to talk about other ways.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. Well, next steps. So y'all are going to receive an email within the next week that's going to have the resources that we mentioned today, as well as the recorded video of the training today. We're also going to include some ripple effects mapping training interest forms in case you'd like to learn more about bringing this training to your community locally. And you'll have the chance also to sign up if you haven't already for our newsletters at IEI, the IEI Digest, Connected, and our Faith and Community newsletters. And a final reminder that our big event, our forum, Emerging Issues Forum, is on February 13th. So registration is not open yet, but we want to make sure everybody gets that date so you have it locked in on your calendars and can join us. All right. Thank y'all so much, everybody, for attending.
Thank you.